teacher. We've actually set it all up. They've printed the hand. We actually found a client down through in Sri Lanka through their Centre for Handicap Centre. And at the moment, the printed hand, the Phoenix, in fact, I think it's the Phoenix hand that they've actually printed, is with a client under test, an adult client under test in Sri Lanka. And Sequoia High and St. Mary's are also going to produce a similar hand and send it out there to get some feedback from the client. So we've not gone through necessarily chapter accreditation, because we found our own client and they were quite happy.
That's great.
To deal with this. So the school over, as I say, over the other side of England, because I've moved like Brent. I moved as well physically in terms of my home.
Yeah.
But now we're actually starting up with dialogue with another school in the UK. If you like, we're starting from scratch there. But they're actually, the first school is a grammar school, which is rather academic angle and selects students on tests, whereas the other school is actually an engineering college and is very into STEM related business. And we've got a possible link with a big Japanese company or Japanese owned company in the area who are very much into injection molding, largely injection molding for the automotive industry. But we're also, they do commercial 3D printing. So there's a sort of, what we're trying to do with a new school is sort of make sure the students are getting the education, enable them to go into STEM related industries. So that's one that's just getting off the ground. I had my first sort of meetings this year to get that going. So, but they're keen on setting an Interact club up with a specific cause of prosthetics, basically, centered around that, rather than a general Rotary club. It's a very much targeted, and I introduced, when I spoke to the principal, I introduced e-NABLE to them and mentioned that obviously the Rotary Worldwide Network, but also the e-NABLE network as well. So yeah, I'm up for sort of beating the drum about e-NABLE, because I've just been browsing around the sites. I came on an hour ahead. I got my times mixed up, but I sort of browsing around the sites, and all the open source material that you guys are providing is absolutely fantastic and would go down really well in schools.
Well, John, you're right. We've got a great big haystack with a lot of really valuable needles. But as you know, there's a problem there. And what we haven't done as well as we might, and I think this is going to be the new push, is first of all to extract the needles from the hay, and secondly to work harder about getting that material out and readily findable, not just by industrious people like you, but for people who say, okay, now what do I do? And don't realize that they have to do the kind of exploring that you're doing. And also to work on tracking of stories, of cases like the one in Sri Lanka that you just talked about.
Yeah.
So I am going to take it upon myself to invite you to think about a presentation that you can give maybe at the next e-NABLE meeting a month from now.
Yeah.
In which you sort of help us understand this, I think, very ripe opportunity. And when I say opportunity, I mean the convergence of Rotary, e-NABLE, and Hodge, who is a former principal and teacher, who is clearly in a great position to play a really strategic role. I'm not, I haven't just put a whole burden of responsibility on you for the program, but you can at least help us understand what the opportunity is. And if that includes recruiting you into our new leadership team, that would be fine. If not, that's also fine. Let me pause for a moment and say, Sarah, are you back? And I'll pause for another moment.
I'm here.
Okay. It sounds like we're not going to
I'm
get Brett, right?
I'm sorry that I wasn't muted when I made that call. I had to remove that section from
Yeah, don't worry about it, Sarah. It was recorded. We had a good conversation anyway. And actually, I urge you to watch the recording because John has sort of opened up a whole realm of possibility that I want to alert you and Adam and Jason to. So that's all fine.
I would love to hear more about that. John, can you share your email with me so that I
sure.
can follow up with you?
If it helps, Sarah, I have got Brent's cell. If I can give him I'll WhatsApp him and see what he's doing.
Yeah, that would be
It's
great.
not too late for that. Well, you do that. Let's say hello to Michael.
Hi, everyone.
Hey there.
Hi there.
Sarah, do you want to regain the moderator's chair, or shall I interview young Michael?
Go for it.
Okay. Michael, where are you coming from?
I'm coming from LA.
LA.
Yep.
And your name is familiar, so you've knocked around in the hub in the past, but I have the memory of a goldfish sometimes. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I'm at a high school called Viewpoint in Southern California, and well, I have taken a big interest in 3D printing, and I wanted to see what I could do with it to be productive instead of just have a hobby. And this thing came up, and I actually have become pretty passionate about it. And I've done a lot of research and stuff, and I wanted to create my own chapter. And I have backing of a K through 12 school. Oh, did I disconnect? There we go. I have the backing of a K through 12 school with a robotics team. And I'm part of that robotics team, and they have 3D printers and a lot of people who also have 3D printers, and I think would be happy to engage in this stuff. And I also have another connection to a law firm, which I think would be happy to support in any way they can. But I just wanted to create a chapter and make as many hands as possible, because I've noticed also on the e-NABLE map that a lot of chapters exist, but not all of them exactly are turning out hands. And I want to add another chapter that will be productive in the system of actually creating hands, delivering them, because I noticed that there's also just the method of delivery just seems a little bit finicky. And so sometimes it looks like it would be difficult to find people to give the hands to sometimes. And that might be kind of feeding the cycle of why people can't get the hands.
All right. Michael, how old are you? Because you have a very acute organizational perspective on this stuff.
I'm 17.
All right. Congratulations. I can see you've done some research. You're up to speed. You're a self-starter. Welcome. So what is your solution to what you've identified as the American e-NABLE Achilles heel right now, which is that we have not done as good a job of identifying recipients as we have of pulling together technology for making hands?
Well,
how are you going to solve that problem, smart guy?
The idea that I had was be a little bit more proactive about it. People who don't necessarily know about the e-NABLE organization when they need something. And so instead of waiting for them to come to you, you go to them. So go to places that make these prosthetics, and where people wouldn't naturally go to if they wanted to find a prosthetic, make these more affordable ones, obviously, because manufactured ones are hard to afford, especially for people who aren't doing as well financially, and continue by making these, instead of having to be fitted, make them kind of a size fits all. So I've been looking at the CAD and seeing how I can try to make a switchable kit that comes in a kit where the fingers are different sizes, but the joints are the same, so you can switch them out. And that way you don't need the sizing mechanism, and people can just go there and pick it up.
That's really interesting, Michael. And it's a good idea. And it's a good idea that comes from clearly a robotics and engineering guy, which is good. But I want to give you a couple of perspectives on what you've said. First of all, it's a great idea. If you have more detail and you'd like to do a presentation, I'd love to see it. Second point, I'm impressed. You're very articulate and you're very, very clear. That suggests to me that engineers fall into two categories in my experience. They're the ones who are really, really good with the stuff, and they're the ones who are also really good at communicating with mere mortals. I think my guess is that you have both skills. And so one thing you should think about doing is taking yourself and our show on the road. And for example, is there a chapter of the Lucky Finn or one of these amputee support group organizations in the LA area? That's where you are, right?
Yep.
And offer to give a presentation. Offer to go and say, look, these are the kinds of hands that are available. We have a bunch of people who would like to make them. We need test pilots. We're geeks. We like making stuff, but we really want to make stuff that people will use. And we need your help figuring out what you really need and how to get them to you. And then you find out what they have to say. They also find out what you have to offer. And you're now building relationships with the weakest link in our chain. Now, I don't give that particular recommendation to all e-NABLE volunteers. But I think you've hit the sweet spot. You could do that. You could put together a presentation. You could tell a good story. I think everyone would be impressed and fascinated. And you might find one or two people, quite possibly of your own age, who either want to know more about the technology and could become part of your chapter, or you might find some people who say, I am someone or I know someone who needs a hand like that. So you too have got an invitation to give a presentation about what you want to do. If you want to, for example, develop that pitch, it would be a great thing for you to do right here. And we'll give you some feedback and we'll support you as we can. Also, I assume you were listening to this conversation with John just now. I'm sure there are dozens of Rotary clubs in the LA area, and they might be really good allies for this also.
I'll see what I can do.
All right. Thank you. Thanks for coming. Thanks for speaking up. John, I gather you couldn't reach Brent?
Yeah, I've messaged him. He's picked up, but I've got nothing since.
Okay.
I've just let your events people have the message, basically. So that's where I'm at.
Okay. That's great.
Can I just pick up on what Michael was saying? Because
absolutely,
what happened in the UK is the school that I set this up in and was supported by Canton Rotary is now offering the students themselves, and they are 17-year-olds, the same age as Michael, they're offering to connect to the students. They're going to connect to 14 to 16-year-olds that they're going to lead it in the new school. Okay, so they've offered that actual support because they have got their head around of all of this. And so, that's brilliant because it's very much about the prosthetics, and the Interact prosthetics is a student-led activity in the school. And what's happened in Sequoia, there's a couple of guys called Gavin and Justin up there, and they actually come online when we have our international meetings. They're the ones that come online, and the teacher provides, obviously we give the meeting details to the teacher, and then they actually represent Sequoia. Here's Brent.
All right.
Hey.
Hello, Brent. Yeah, you're on mute. We're 80% there. You're on mute.
I apologize. I completely lost track of time.
We have actually filled the hour with, first of all, an update on what you and John have done over the time. And Michael, 17-year-old in LA, who is doing, I think, a really good idea of both getting up to speed and thinking strategically about how to proceed. And I'd say it's not too late for you to give us the presentation you were going to give. Give us a little bit of self-introduction if that's not built into the presentation, and go for it.
All right, so my name is Brent Hollers. I have been involved with e-NABLE for a number of years now. I am currently at St. Mary's Academy in Fayetteville, Georgia. We are working with John Hodge and one of the Rotary groups in Sri Lanka to provide prosthetics for them. And kind of my interest in the program started when I was coaching robotics, and I kind of see the program and was interested in getting one started, but really wasn't able to do that until I had a student who wanted an Eagle Scout project. And so I was like, hey, you should start an e-NABLE charter. And he was one of my robotics students. And so he ran with it, got it all started. And that's where the Sequoia chapter actually came from. Sequoia High School being the school I was at before. And so got a long ways in there, but kind of recognized some difficulties and some possible strategies for growth along the way with that program. They're still up and running and have been meeting with John as well as myself. And I moved into a director of IT role here at the school I'm at now, but I also kind of help run their STEM programs. And so we've created a group here that's started working on building prosthetics in conjunction with Sequoia and with Laos Rotary, which is what John is a part of, and another group's actually joining us in the UK as well. And so I've been 18 years in education, teaching various STEM subjects. Last 2 weeks, I actually just spent learning quite a bit from the University of Notre Dame about STEM education. I was up there with a group of my fellow coworkers for a 2-week intensive cohort that we go to for the next 3 summers. So that was pretty cool. So we learned some neat curricular things. And if you don't mind, I'll just share my screen real quick, and I can jump into the document here and show you what I was thinking. So you should be able to see that. Let me go full screen. It makes it a little bit easier to read. So another person who couldn't be here today is Jacqueline Murphy. She's our STEM coordinator. And so she kind of helps me with some of the various distribution of curriculum and planning and logistics. And kind of this all started with the idea that we want to look at what are ways that we can kind of streamline the process for chapters, especially educational chapters, because I view educational chapters, hold on just a second, sorry. There's a summer camp, actually there's a STEM summer camp going on right now, and they're starting to make some noise.
While you're there, can you hit the plus key on your browser to make the text a little bit larger?
Oh yeah. Is that a little better?
Much better.
So part of our kind of discussion revolved around we feel like educational institutions are uniquely situated to provide an opportunity for students to become involved with e-NABLE and to kind of streamline the production of devices, the utilization of devices, the marketing of the program. Was it Adam I was talking to the other day that I think was copied on?
That's right, Adam Jennings.
Yeah, Adam Jennings. We were talking just the other day about it, and it seems to kind of align with, sorry, let me get back to that tab. Let's see. It seems to align very much with what he was talking about with consulting and marketing with e-NABLE to get the program more widely known, more streamlined, possibly be able to integrate with other avenues for receiving clients, because I know that's typically an issue. And so kind of the idea that we had was to come up with a prepackaged curriculum that students could or teachers could take and then utilized in STEM classrooms. It would be tied to various national standards. And then it would have not only what is e-NABLE, why is e-NABLE, all these questions that you have kind of right off the top, but it would have an easy path of entry to get them involved in the program. And so the goal is to initially kind of phase in some initial components of that curriculum. So starting out with getting started, organizing chapters, devices and materials, kind of the initial things that people kind of get hung up on, and then eventually modules on 3D printing, on design, scaling models, all that kind of stuff, which would tie into a number of curricular objectives that would allow teachers to then implement them. And so there's a couple different ways to do this. My recommendation would be to use an LMS. And that LMS could be either like a Moodle or a Canvas. I talked to Adam about that as well. But basically, you can build those packages in the LMS, and then there's a couple different ways you can go about it. You can just make it free and available curriculum. You could actually have it as a curriculum package that teachers could purchase, so that money could then flow back into e-NABLE in terms of building out whatever other projects are possible. So it could potentially become a viable income revenue source as well. But you would build out the initial stages of that, do some testing with students and with organizations to make sure that it's what we want to do and it looks clean, it's understandable, all that kind of stuff. And then eventually we build out the remainder of the curriculum, and then it'd be something that teachers could enact throughout the course of a semester or a year, but gives them a good launching point and starting off point. So we would say, here's 3D printers, here's options 1, 2, and 3 for 3D printers that we would recommend that you use based on these particular needs. Here's the different designs. This is the design that we recommend that you start with. Here's why. I also kind of thought of the idea of, even if they were to purchase it as a curriculum package, that we may even have an outlet for all these students that want to do hand builds and build-a-thons. Instead of building the hands, if they would like to source the parts and let a new chapter build the hands as a practice run. So that's part of what we did with John's group in Louth, is that we sent them a bunch of kits and let them kind of assemble them to get a feel for that process before they actually started making their first hands. And so that would be something that you could say, we're going to charge you $500 and we'll send you a bunch of kits, right, that are not built yet, but have all the resources and materials. Here's the guide, follow the guide, build the hand, and it gets them some experience with that process. All that can be tied to national standards. And the reason why that's important is twofold. First is that when you're looking at educational institutions, it's very hard to onboard new programs if they don't tie to classroom curriculum. And so like we do e-NABLE because of the robotics team and our connection with Rotary. That's how our e-NABLE programs got started. If we did not have those, it's likely that it would have never gotten started. I had heard about it through just various, channels with conversations I've had with other people, but it's not something that currently in its current form is very user-friendly from an educator perspective. They have to understand 3D printing, they have to understand the goal and the objective, they have to find it, and there's not a consistent kind of messaging for how that looks and works. So that's the first part. The second part is that with the setup of the curriculum, if it's standards tied, they can implement that directly in their classroom, which makes it easier for you to have the justification of, well, we're going to spend $500. We're going to get this kit. We're going to do it as a one-off lesson in our classroom, and it's going to have a physics focus, or it's going to have a properties of materials focus, or whatever it happens to be. And you could set that up in a variety of different ways. I was telling Adam yesterday, or day before yesterday, that you could even in all states, there's a program called CTE, which stands for Career and Technical Education. It's what your technical vocational type degrees used to be. So they don't have those anymore, but they have these pathways. And there is a nursing medicine pathway in every state. And so you could even tie that into that curriculum. So you could have curriculum packages based off of what those particular areas are. And because that's all funded by the federal government through the Perkins grant and the Perkins funding, which is renewed, has already been renewed and is renewed every so many years. It's very easy to tap into that if it's standards aligned and if it has some application to their particular pathway. So not only do you have the opportunity to get into science and math classes, but you could also do these career pathways, which are always looking for practical applications for their things. So that was kind of the mindset of the project. So we would be looking at having to build out all that curriculum. The development of the curriculum would be primarily done by myself and Jacqueline. And then we wanted to bring in maybe a couple other people from different age levels. So if we wanted to do like a collegiate one eventually, we'd probably need to bring someone in from the college area to help work with that. I adjunct for college courses, but I'm not a college, full-time college professor. So we would want to bring someone in to do that. Obviously, we'd have to do testing with students. We have access to some students, but we'd want to eventually be able to roll that out to a broader network of volunteer schools that might look at the curriculum and review it and give us feedback on it. But basically what you see here is an initial starting point. So this is getting those first 3 or 4 modules up and running, testing them, making sure that it all works correctly, that everybody's happy with it. Going through a few iterations, design iterations of that curriculum before we get to something solid. Then once we have that built, we can stem off of that and say, okay, well, this is the basics. Everybody goes to the basics. All right, if you're healthcare, you're going to do this set of lessons. If you're going to do science, or this set. If you're middle school science, you're this subset, and so on. So you can eventually branch it out to those various areas and tie all those again to the national standards, which allows you to get funding for all those things. So that's kind of the general plan and perspective of what we're going to try to do. Like I said, we deliver all this through an LMS. Canvas is free. Moodle is free and open source, so it's a little bit easier to customize. Canvas you can use for free, but you get to a point where they're going to want you to start paying for it. So I've developed and set up Moodle servers before. I actually have my own currently that I host. So really the only thing from a Moodle perspective that you would have to do would be pay for hosting, just base level hosting. Yep.
I'm sorry, I was just going to say, so you're suggesting that you and Jacqueline and maybe another college embedded instructor could produce 3 modules for $10,000.
Yes.
So first of all, and is it clear to you what those 3 modules would be? Is that on the previous?
So they're right here. So getting started, chapter organization, devices and materials. Those would be our first 3. We could add a 4th one in there if we wanted to get some of the instructional content side, because really until you get to devices and material, there's no standards tie-in. So those are going to be a little bit shorter and simpler. Once you get to devices and materials, now you're starting to get into physics, science, all that kind of stuff, right, because you're talking about how 3D printers work, all those kinds of things. So one of the things you're doing here is you are recognizing that you could actually teach all sorts of scientific topics, things that are usually taught in the abstract, embedded in this very practical and motivated activity. Yep. So first of all, I think it's great. I'm actually thinking along similar lines in the climate space right now, and I could learn a lot from you. However, number 2, as Adam probably told you, we are preparing to go back to the DORA Foundation, which has supported us in the past for 3 years. And I think they might be very enthusiastic about that. Keep in mind that they are particularly interested in handcraft. And interestingly, they decided that what we're doing is indeed handcraft, both because there's a lot of hands-on activity involved in assembling and even in printing. But of course, we're making hands for people who don't have hands. So they, I think, thought outside of their box. And I think they've indicated that they would be receptive to another round. Last time it was a 3-year cycle, and they've been happy with what we did in the last 3 years. This could become the core of that. Those are 2 ways, because the other thing you should know is that while we
we have 10,000 in the bank right now. We've also begun this engagement with Adams Consulting Firm, and one of their top priorities, because we don't have that much in the bank, is to develop funding proposals and try to increase the coffer, both to sustain the good work that I think they've already proven they're beginning to do, and these kinds of projects. So that's all good news, and it means that Adam should see this proposal if he hasn't already. And I think we should talk to Jason about putting this forward when we go back to the Dora Foundation and say, here's one of the new things we think we can do to kick it up another level and address some of the gaps in what we've been offering. That's all positive and good. I'm going to pause for a second because now I want to talk about a concern that I have. But see if John or Michael or Sarah have any other comments on what you're suggesting.
Can I just say from the UK point of view, obviously Brent's talking about basically education across the states, and linking at the moment in the UK, it's what we call an add-on, if you like. The way it's worked is it's actually got really taken off in the school that Brent and I sort of worked with over in the UK. And as I said earlier, they've got an Interact club designated for the prosthetics, and they have just loved Tinkercad and all these sort of the if you like, the add-ons. And it's really sort of brought their mindsets, because they're kids that are interested in STEM, and it's got a group of students together that are enthusiastic, and they can see a real client and have that dialogue. And Brent and I have talked about this dialogue with a real client, which is what they're going to do, you know, when they leave education,
right,
and they go into work environment. They're going to work with clients, and it's a valuable learning tool. So at the moment, that's where we are, because I think mapping the educational elements of STEM across continents could be quite difficult. Brent seems to have a handle on the states, you know, and in the education there, and federal funding and this type of thing, which is great. But we also need to bear in mind we've got a couple of schools in Sri Lanka that are linked to the Rotary Club there, that are linked to the Centre of Handicap there. The timing's slightly difficult, because when we have our 3 continents meeting, it's like 10 a.m. in the States, and it's 8:30 at night in Sri Lanka, you know. But we have got 2 schools there that are actually engaging, if you like. It's quite sort of light touch, but you know, they might be doing it as extracurricular. They might be doing it as part of the curriculum. So that's really where we stand anyway over in the UK. Right.
So alignment with standards aside, because the standards are different in UK and Sri Lanka than here, are you saying that something like this would be useful to schools in England and Sri Lanka?
I'm saying I think, you know, the proposal there that Brent is, I think it could be modeled in other countries.
Yes.
And I think once you've got, it's a bit like what we did in the first school in the UK. You know, we got them familiar with the hand and actually learning about the hand and how it's put together, and then into Tinkercad, and then the STI files and all the rest of it. But you know, I think once you've done it, once you've been through it in one country, you can model it in other countries. You know, there's scope there. I think it'd be quite challenging, but the key aspect is it's a real motivator, because in the UK we've got like traditional sort of sectors in the 16 to 18 bracket. A levels are traditionally academic, and they have a lot of trouble actually relating to practical areas. You know, they learn the theory and they're brilliant at that, you know, but then when it comes to applying the theory, it can be quite difficult when they get to university, or in the States terms, college, because they don't sort of link into the practical aspects, but that's a great motivator. But interestingly, in the UK, we've got a development of something called T-levels, and Brent's conversation there about technical sort of education, whatever you want to call it. But basically, it's all about students that might be motivated, not necessarily to go to university, but want to get in straight into businesses at 18.
Sure.
And actually, we call them in the UK apprenticeships, then that's obviously another area for growth.
So you've already raised the concern I wanted to raise, which is the whole question of connecting to real clients and making sure that we don't just create lots and lots of makers who are oriented around making hands, but we haven't connected to the amputees who would benefit from them. And I think there are two answers to that. And Michael, this applies to the conversation we were having earlier as well. One is, of course, to do outreach to groups or to develop partnerships with places like this rehab center in Sri Lanka that will ensure that the devices we made and the device makers we make connect with real recipients. The other is to say it doesn't have to be just hands. One of the things that I imagine Brent and Adam talked about is the notion that, our hands are wonderful sort of engineering and learning things, but the number of people who would benefit from 3D printed assistive devices for a variety of motor impairment activities is much larger, and many of those devices are actually more robust than the hands that we make. I'm talking about cup holders for wheelchairs or maybe orthotics, all sorts of things, that door handle openers. There's a whole field of occupational therapy, and there are already collections of 3D printed assistive devices and organizations that I think are more receptive to what volunteers can do with their 3D printers than the prosthetics themselves, than the prosthetists in this country, at least. So Brent, I'm wondering, have you thought about other assistive technologies besides hands?
Yes,
and
actually.
whether you think this could be adapted as a way of saying, now that we're making it modular and learnable, let's not point it down the dead end that so many of our makers have encountered when it comes to 3D printed hands per se.
Yeah, so John's very familiar with this as well. The Sri Lanka people, when we first connected with them, the number one need they had was orthotics. And I think that that's a great starting point because it's much simpler than in terms of manufacturing than a hand. It's going to be more robust. It was a high need for them. They also have lower leg amputees and those kind of things. I know there's models out there for lower leg amputee devices. So I think the sky's the limit for that kind of stuff. And that was kind of one of our goals this year, is that we have a current client that we're working with, but then my goal is this year to start looking at their orthotics problem, because we've had a lot of conversations with them about that, because right now they're hand making all of them. And so if we could find a way of doing like a mold, like a 3D printed mold, and then you learn to cast, a resin or something like that, then you can make that mold, and then you could ship them the mold and the cast, and then that way they could use it for future if they needed. But then you're also, again, you're still tying into properties of materials, you're tying into three-dimensional modeling, all those kinds of things. It's just a different application.
And have you looked at makers making change in their PT and OT devices?
I have not yet. Okay,
so that's another relationship and a presentation that was made in a town hall meeting not too long ago. I suspect that's the sweet spot. Orthotics are medical devices. Cup holders, which in many cases are even more useful, are not medical devices. And to my knowledge, there are no high-level professionals who will feel threatened by what we're doing. So I'm going to suggest to you, I'm going to suggest to Adam and to Jason that we look at those other, let's call them dexterity enhancing 3D printable devices, and see whether you would be receptive to identifying that as the target, not just hands. And then I think if we were to go to the Dora Foundation, they would see that this is a step up in several ways that would address getting more and more people doing this sort of customized craft public service and learning in the schools, and a pipeline that would give more of them a chance to actually interact with the real users.
I agree. And one of the things that I would say to that point too is that assistive devices like, cup holders, door pulls, that kind of stuff are easily iterated on and designed by students.
That's right. They can do more of the actual design and invention than these more complicated devices. Michael, is this all making sense to you? Do you have any comments to put in?
None, it all made sense.
All right. All right.
I have a couple of questions, if that's okay.
Sarah, of course.
Great. And first, I'm just going to put my email in the chat so that John and Michael, just to make sure that you have it. And Michael, I'm glad you're here. I coordinate things, so if you have any questions about anything, feel free to send me a message anytime. And John too, I'd love to connect with you about a future education meeting. So, but my questions for Brent. So first, just within the course modules, would you have a separate module, or would you build into it some disability perspectives and some information from people who are actually using the devices and how they use them and what their needs and priorities are? Would that be a separate unit, or would that just be built into all of the units? And then I also am wondering about the steps between making the curriculum available and making sure that it's used and can be and will be used and used again across all different schools and in all different places. Sort of what's the marketing plan?
Those are two great points, Sarah.
Yeah, so the first one, the disability perspectives, actually the training I mentioned that we just got back from addressed that directly. And they called it contextualizing, right? And I was actually talking with another person that does prosthetics that happened to be there as well. And that's one of the things that we discuss, is that it's kind of pointless just to build hands. And so each lesson, each design challenge, you start with the context. So this particular person, this particular client, it doesn't have to be like an actual person, although ideally we would interview some people and then build that into it. Like, this particular person uses an assistive device, name has been changed to protect the innocent, kind of thing. But, this is what they're having trouble with. You might even have a video where it shows them struggling with what they're trying to do, so the students get to think about it and some perspective from their end, because that's gonna be critical for them to understand the design challenge anyways. And so I think that's absolutely a great idea, and that could definitely be implemented. And then that would change based on the assistive device. So if we're going on multiple device routes, then each one of those would be a various pathway that they're going to walk through depending on what part of the curriculum they choose to roll through with that. And at the beginning of each of those design challenges would have that contextualizing occur. In terms of availability and use, there's a couple different possibilities. One is through networking on social media, which is something that I could do as a part of that once we get it built. The other is going to a couple different conferences that have a large number of teachers that are especially more technology savvy, so like an ISTE, an ITEEA, those types of organizations. I know there's international ones as well. If we want to start going down the international route as well, there's some that have, teacher conferences where you can apply to be a presenter and talk about it. And that's something I've done a number of times in a variety of different conferences. So I'd be happy to put those together and run through that. I think that's the best way, is word of mouth and through networking, because as soon as people start seeing it, some of the things that we experienced is that when we first started the program in Sequoia and we started giving them to local clients, and we actually had kind of a news story in our hands, one of the parents, just without me even knowing, honestly, reached out to CNN and they did a news story on us, and we started getting inundated with new clients. And part of my discussion with Adam the other day was that there was a huge need for a reverse extraction. I don't know what you would call it, but basically for people with cerebral palsy who have a clenched fist all the time, and you want them to be able to do the reverse of what we're doing, which is open the hand versus close the hand. And so there's all sorts of things that come along with that. But I think that word of mouth networking through social media, through presentations at teacher conferences with people that are specifically very interested in technology and engineering integration is going to be your first kind of foundational level. Once you get, some schools on board with that, then you can kind of start looking at next steps with, having maybe our own e-NABLE conference where we talk about these things and continue to kind of expand the network and those kinds of things. And then also getting them onto these education meetings, getting them more involved in the community will eventually expand it as well. But I think that's kind of the low-hanging fruit is conference presentations and social media networks with people that are actually utilizing the curriculum to start with.
Sarah, are you satisfied with those answers?
Yes. Thank you.
All right. I think it's a great start. Sarah, can I ask you to send a note to Adam and Jason and point them to what I think is really quite a convergence that comes out of this meeting. This notion of they're going to be approaching the Dora Foundation, and I think that Brent's proposal is really very well cooked, especially when it is tweaked in order to include the issues we have raised, you and me, the notion of not just hands, the notion of contextualizing, as Brent puts it, and perhaps even some pointing out how great it is if you can get a real recipient in to provide the context and giving them some coaching on that. And then the whole question of how does this get marketed and disseminated? And I think Brent is right that he'll get extra points for giving presentations at conferences about this and getting news coverage, and that will spread it around. Secondly, let's alert Adam and Jason to the Rotary channel as a way of taking these kinds of things and again packaging it and being able to make it much easier for groups in each location to go to their local Rotary and to plug into this Interactors network, which sounds perfect for this. And on that, John sounds like he's really well positioned to be a good liaison. And I think John took the bait and would be willing to give us a briefing on Rotary and Interactors and what you're doing.
Sure. Certainly, I forget which it was. Brent might be able to say. What Rotary district are you in, Brent? It's this.
We're 60. Is it 6900?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get the 6910 and 6900. And certainly the one in Canton that's linked to Canton, because there's only 3 Rotary districts in Georgia, basically. But the one related to Canton, we're very keen on actually raising the profile of this across the district, weren't they, Brent? They were really, Canton Rotary said, wow, you should share this. And so we have a contact at Canton Rotary, who's got contacts within the district. So we need to get that shouted about at district level, because things are still happening at Sequoia, which is one district, but things are happening at St. Mary's now, which is another district. So you've got like 2 districts, 2 Rotary clubs in the States, and I'm sure we can do parallel work like that in the UK with the 2 districts that the 2 schools are involved in here, and 2 Rotary clubs.
And there is a structure for, there's like a district director, and there's a person that's in charge of like education at the district level, as well as each of the Rotary clubs for the most part. Like the Canton Rotary, the District 6910 is much larger than the one that we're involved with currently. And so they have like a specific person that's designated to working with educational institutions and the interact clubs within their area. We just got Sonoya Rotary on board. We have a middle school and a high school charter, and they're very enthusiastic, but they're very much brand new to it. Whereas Canton's had 4 years now of kind of seeing how this has progressed, and they've been able to provide a number of resources for Sequoia to kind of get things rolling, and 3D printers, those kinds of things, through some of the foundations they work with. So they're a little more invested in it from a perspective of they've been involved with it longer and have more financial investment in it.
Yeah,
Great.
And one of the Rotary districts Brent's right. The districts have a structure like district governor, and then they have a district governor-elect and a district governor nominee. So they have like a continuity team of people who are going to come online the next year and so on. And one of the team in the continuity team within the Yorkshire-Lincolnshire district was actually looked at the growth of Rotary in the Ukraine, particularly since the war, and also providing prosthetics for the victims of the war, which is going to be ongoing for years and years and years. And it's not just related to the Ukraine war. Any conflict zone, you're going to have people who need these. In fact, in Sri Lanka, it was Tamil Tiger related because of the unrest there. So there is a lot of scope there. I like the idea of the assisted technologies, because it's providing a more basic level, if you like, and it doesn't link to clients as such, but the strength of the prosthetics and the hands is actually linking to those clients and having that dialogue with them. And that's a higher level skill, and it is something that's really really exciting. So it's not just related to Sri Lanka, as I say, it can widen out. Yeah.
Okay, I have to go, and this turns out to have been a very rich meeting. John, roughly a month from now, or do you want to do your presentation?
Yeah, the end of August. Yeah, I'll need to look at the calendar,
All
but
right.
you'll need to share the dates and so on. But,
Okay.
John, we can email. I set these meetings up and organize the calendar, so
She'll follow up.
we can email about that. Your email is, I think you sent it to me. So.
Yeah, I put the Louth Rotary.
Okay.
Email. Yeah.
Okay, I'll follow up with you about dates for you to present, and that's wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, you need to bear in mind the educational years, because over in the UK they're all on holiday at the moment, and they will be till September. So whereas in the States you're off like June, July. So it depends who your audiences are, as to you're not going to get UK involvement in August. So
good to know.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, great. Sarah, thanks for coordinating. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah.
If you have any questions, you can, or ideas for what to do next, Sarah is the responsible one, but I'd be happy to, if you CC'd me, and I'll chip in as I can. And so I'll put my email into here. And for now, I will say goodbye.
Thank you, John.
Okay, good